When it comes to the state of the news industry, the news has not been good. Over a span of less than 2 decades, a quarter of the country's newspapers have folded. That translates to tens of thousands of reporters laid off, and it means far less coverage of communities across the country, less scrutiny of what local government is up to, what police departments are doing, how schools are performing. Driven primarily by the Internet's disruption of the long-standing business model supporting newspapers, the alarming disappearance of papers and the hollowing out of many of those that have survived has been dubbed the crisis in local journalism. But the news about the news is not entirely grim. In the face of these trends, a new model of nonprofit news is sprouting across the country. Foundations, corporate donors, and individuals are stepping forward to fund nonprofit news organizations. They've declared that rigorous, independent journalism is vital to a healthy, functioning democracy. The latest such declaration has come from Worcester, where the local Chamber of Commerce announced this month that it is launching a new nonprofit news website, the Worcester Guardian, to provide more coverage of the state's second-largest city. It's welcome news to those hungry for more journalism in Worcester. It has also raised questions about the independence of a news operation that's receiving funding from the local business community. I'm Michael Jonas from CommonWealth Magazine. Joining us on the podcast to talk about this new venture in news is Tim Murray, the president and CEO of the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce, which has spearheaded this effort. He is also the former 2-term mayor of Worcester and former lieutenant governor of the Commonwealth. Tim Murray, welcome to the podcast.
Michael, thanks for having me.
So help us understand what's happening in Worcester and this new enterprise that you and the Chamber have helped to launch. Why does Worcester need the Worcester Guardian?
Well, I would encourage, first readers and listeners to go to the worcesterguardian.org website, also the Worcester Chamber of Commerce website, worcesterchamber.org. On both of those websites, we have the white paper that was developed over the course of the last year that we presented to the Chamber Board back in July that really details some of the data that you talked about in your opening, Michael. We have seen across the country since 2000, 2,200 newspapers close. They say that on average, 2 newspapers close a week. We've seen, I think the other data point from Pew Research Center that 40,000 newsroom positions have been cut in the United States between 2008 and 2020. And so this is a phenomenon, unfortunately, that is happening across the country. And Worcester, unfortunately, has not been spared. And that makes the situation here in Worcester particularly acute because the dominant news entity for decades, if not at least 100 years, has been the Worcester Telegram and Gazette. And Worcester, unlike Boston or Springfield or Providence, we do not have affiliate TV stations. The Telegram, as I said, has really been the dominant news source. And they have dramatically cut over the last 10 years their news staff. And we've seen the impact. I think anyone in Worcester, regardless of where they might sit, if anyone follows the news at the least bit, have seen the consequences of that. And it impacts, as we said in the white paper, it's a threat to the civic and economic health of our community when that information collapse takes place. And so we studied what is going on across the country. It started with a team of Clark students who did an initial report that we presented to our executive board. That was followed by the in-depth white paper that we have put together and then released that publicly with the announcement that we would help facilitate the launch, put some seed money together, and help try to launch what is taking place in many communities, not just across the country, but here in the Commonwealth. And I would point out that, CommonWealth Magazine, now Commonwealth Beacon, is also a great example of nonprofit journalism where, you're out, where you try to draw that line and make sure it's a hard, impenetrable line where you've got the news and editorial content, and then there's a fundraising and administrative piece. So we're looking to model what's happening across the country. And here in Massachusetts, we talked in the white paper extensively about the New Bedford Light, Vermont Dig, Texas Tribune, and Commonwealth Beacon is a great example as well.
Well, we thank you for the plug, and we are indeed, part of this nonprofit journalism ecosystem that is blossoming or trying to take root, to keep it with the growing metaphor, across the country. So it's interesting that you're saying that there were some students at Clark that maybe, to keep with that, planted the seed here. I mean, did they bring that to you? Had you all been in conversation already about this, or just help us understand the kind of whole genesis of, and how long have these kind of, preliminary conversations been going?
Well, here at the Chamber, probably for a couple of years, as each cut has been announced, particularly at the Telegram, we see the impact. And so we reached out to Clark University a couple of years ago. They were able to kind of give us a name of a team and some students, and they started some of that work. And that was then kind of taken to the next level with our white paper. But from a chamber point of view, and I think anyone who cares about some of the things that you talked about, what's happening at the school board, what's happening at planning and zoning boards, how is international affairs and immigration impacting the community here? How do we localize these stories that help try to get people information from trained journalists with editors that presents both sides of the story, and then kind of informs the community about actions and opportunities to get involved. And so that's not our expertise. We freely admit that. And that is why, right out of the gate, David Nordman was asked to serve as the consultant in this process to kind of handle the news and editorial hiring process. Our job is to try to spread the word about this model, to try to encourage people in the business community, philanthropic community, foundations, businesses, individual, readers, nonprofit institutions, all who have a stake and are invested in Worcester and Central Massachusetts and its well-being, to kind of help play a role and contribute in whatever way they can to kind of share the story and build that civic goodwill that is so critical, I think, to healthy, vibrant communities on so many levels.
Help us understand why the Chamber of Commerce, with all of the activities it's involved in and representing businesses, has decided that a, kind of thriving, vibrant local news operation is so critical to the region. What's the connection between the mission and work of the Chamber and what a local news operation does?
Well, if you have a good exchange of ideas and information about what's happening at City Hall and in other parts of the community, when you have that good civic engagement, that also directly relates to the economic health and well-being of a community. A business community can't be successful if we're not working together to address a whole host of issues and challenges that we face. Issues, of housing, of transportation challenges, environmental issues. So those are all interconnected on so many different levels. And so also conversations, at City Hall with the planning board or zoning board. There was a time when those things were regularly covered by the Telegram, and those we've seen again that contraction impact. And what happens, Michael, is when that information from trained journalists with editors is not getting out there in a way that people can generally objectively appreciate, you've got these, and we talk about this in the white paper, and it's not a phenomenon I think that anybody is surprised with. You've got elements of social media and opinion oriented journalism with a certain kind of ideological perspective that kind of fills the void, if you will. And that's not always accurate, or certainly does not, present both sides of an argument. And so we think it's important to get that information, generally speaking, that tells both sides of the stories, let people know what's going on. It's clear what's editorial opinion and what's kind of editorial just reporting and content. And that's I think, central to so many important discussions, not just related to the business community. So that's why. And I would just say that it's also, the Chamber helping launch and facilitate, and then as quickly as possible get out of the way. That's our goal. Is consistent with the role that we've played. The Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce will be celebrating its 150th anniversary in 2025. And you look over the course of that history, it's really amazing to think about how we've existed, giving international and national upheavals, depressions, world wars, at least two plagues, if you will, COVID being the most recent, the technological changes. We helped launch 103, 104 years ago, the it was launched. The paperwork was signed at the Chamber of Commerce to create the United Way of Central Massachusetts. We helped spin off the Worcester Business Development Corporation in the early 2000s, which was the kind of the mass development of Worcester County, and they do great work. Now a separate board and organization. MBI, an incubator for life sciences and biotech, also spin off out of the chamber. And then more recently, working with the Health Foundation of Central Mass to create the Worcester Regional Food Hub, which works with area farmers, as well as has a commercial kitchen to help and train food-related startup businesses as well. So, we will sometimes get out of our comfort zone to do things that are for the benefit of the community. And we see this as being consistent with that. So, that's our goal, as I mentioned, and having someone with expertise like David Nordman to launch, as we launch, to handle the reporting and the editing piece of it, management. And he's already hired an editor, which was also announced. We're hopeful that we can quickly stand this up, build a base level of financial support, kind of get out of the way and let this nonprofit independent organization put more reporters on the street in a variety of different ways, which is going to benefit the community, I think, in a lot of different ways.
So to your point about sort of the chamber helping get it going, and then you said, we quickly want to get out of the way. Talk a little bit about that, because I think in the initial days since this announcement, there's been sort of, a little bit of chatter about both, on the one hand, people welcoming the idea of a new operation in Worcester to cover things, and then some people saying, oh, it's a little bit, alarm bells going off. Wait, the Chamber of Commerce is going to run a news operation? It sounds more like a PR operation than a journalism operation. And I think from what we've read since then, that might have been a little bit of a misconstruing of how things work. I know the Chamber has put forward this initial $50,000. Now, that hardly is going to be enough to sustain an operation like this. And also, as you mentioned, Dave Nordman, who, if I'm not wrong, was formerly the editor of the Worcester Telegram and Gazette. So it's a little bit, fitting, I guess, when we talk about the contraction there, that it's a former editor of the kind of legacy paper in Worcester that has signed on and is serving as sort of an advisor or consultant to this effort. Can you just help us understand a little the structure of it, and who's and how it's going to operate and who's going to be in charge?
Yeah, well, right now, we asked David out of the gate to be the consultant advisor because we wanted to send a message and be honest and open that it's clear that the editorial reporting side needs to be done by a professional who knows that end of the business. And so David's willingness to come on in that regard was immensely helpful in us being able to go forward. He has handled solely the hiring of the editor, Charlene Arsenault, which was recently announced. When we made this announcement, there were a number of inquiries that we received from reporters and individuals looking to maybe do freelance or correspondent work. They were immediately told to talk to Dave Nordman, and he's building a team with Charlene in that regard. And that's the way it should be. Our job is to help get the word out to business community, to institutional leaders, to the broader community about this effort. Let people know that there's ways that they can support it, and that this will be run by an independent board. And that board will work and establish, as we talked about in the release, a community advisory board as well, so that they're getting constant feedback. And Michael, we recognize and we understood that when we roll this out, there's going to be, it's not, people aren't going to just say, hey, this is wonderful. People are going to have questions, and there's going to be feedback, and most of it's been constructive. And David has taken all of that into account on our side of it, which is more the administrative piece and helping kind of at least seed this financially. Take that as it comes and where it's constructive. But as I said, our goal is to quickly try to get that financial base in place so that it can really plan for the remainder of the year and next year to scale. That's the goal. And I would just point out that in our study and review of this, of how other, independent, free, nonprofit news organizations were created across the country and here locally, there's no template. There's no necessarily cookie cutter approach here. I think it's, generally speaking, people of goodwill who try to recognize that how important good civic journalism is on so many different levels. And in Worcester, as I mentioned, it's particularly needed because of the collapse of the Telegram. And I just want to say one thing. The reporters and editors that are at the Telegram right now are doing great work. And all you needed to do is read some of the articles just over the last couple of weeks, some stories that they have broke. Our fundamental concern is that there's just not enough of them. And there are some other good newspapers and organizations that are more weekly, or the Business Journal and others, Worcester Business Journal. But our point is they're doing good work, but we need more journalists. And I come back to that data point from the Pew Research Center that 40,000 newsroom jobs have been eliminated between 2008 and 2020. And unfortunately, here in Central Mass, we are a part of that 40,000 plus cut. So this is what we're trying to help facilitate. And we think, whatever short-term brickbats we get, are well worth it. But I would say that generally the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, with a number of people wanting to figure out ways that they can help the effort.
And I think it was in your white paper at some point, in talking about this vision of civic news and news that really kind of focuses, I guess, constructively on covering issues in the city and the region. The paper kind of decried what it said sometimes is more like gotcha journalism. And I guess I just wonder, again, kind of kicking the tires of it is at some point there's gotcha journalism, but then the kind of flip side of that is what some people might just say is accountability journalism. So, where is that line between something that might seem, a little over the top versus, this role of journalism and of the press, which, is not always to make everybody happy. And sometimes people are going to be unhappy. And I guess sometimes, is there going to be a story in the Worcester Guardian that might make the chamber not that happy, or some business interests?
Michael, I hope that's the case. Accountability journalism is needed, and we've seen some good accountability journalism here locally. We need more of it, but that's where it's substantive. Both sides are given an opportunity to give their viewpoints, their rationales as to why decisions were made or didn't made, and that's what good trained journalists do, working with editors to make sure that people, individuals, organizations are held accountable, but both sides of the stories are given the opportunity to make that case. So we embrace that. I think that's something we talk about, but it's about kind of educating the public in that process and letting them make the decisions in the reporting. And certainly, if we're lucky enough to get this to a point to scale, there's clear areas of opinion, editorial and journalism, and making that distinction clear at the outset.
Help understand the timeline of the trajectory you're on. So you sort of made the announcement and announced the chambers sort of seeded this with 50,000. It sort of, you could imagine an announcement that comes after, you've raised some numbers of hundreds of thousands and you say we're launching next week and we have a staff of 5. You're kind of announcing it. It seems in part to kind of generate interest in some of that funding. So when is this thing actually anticipated to launch? And is there a goal for how much you think you need to raise in the first year, and what sort of size, staff are you hoping to have?
Yeah, I'm going to, let Dave Nordman kind of comment on that. But I would say, just generally speaking, they're hoping to begin to generate news content soon. I think the announcement with Charlene Arsenault as the editor, based upon the response and inquiries that David has fielded in conversations he's had, and I hope, I think they hope to be able to generate news content soon, which would be available, free through the various social media platforms. People can go to the worcesterguardian.org and get on the daily email list as well. So that's another way. That 50,000 was for us to kind of seed the operation and begin the conversations, which we've started with other potential funders locally to help kind of underwrite the 2024 plan and build and scale. And, how you roll these things out, again, looking and studying how some of the nonprofit outlets have come to fruition in other communities. It's all very different. I think we know there's a need now, and we've seen a dramatic shrinking over the last couple of years in particular. So we wanted to try to, help begin to fill that void as quickly as possible, which is why we made the announcement, rolled out the white paper, announced Dave is handling the news and editorial piece and the hiring. And it's gone, I would say, faster than maybe initially anticipated, which is great, which means content will get out there and on a range of issues, which will help inform the community.
You mentioned sort of the models in other cities, and I guess maybe none of the others had quite the same, you said there's no cookie cutter model of the local chamber doing it, and that has been the thing maybe that's sort of drawn some of the attention to your effort, in ways maybe that, initially there was, questions were raised. But I do remember that the New Bedford Light, which is an operation that's been going now for a little while on the South Coast, it did have not the direct involvement of the city in funding it, but I know the mayor there, John Mitchell, was very candid and outspoken in encouraging that and saying, he wanted to see it. Again, he's not funding it, but it's not as if, I think there's a case also where he realizes it's not always going to be, kind of the John Mitchell show on the New Bedford Light, just, praising all the good work he does. They've got a great columnist there who, again, came from the New Bedford Standard-Times, a former reporter there, Jack Spillane. He writes very, kind of tough, hard-hitting columns, and I'd say almost, all of the political leaders there, nobody is sort of safe from his pen when he kind of calls it like he sees it. But again, I think broadly speaking, he may not love every column that he sees, but, Mayor Mitchell there has said desperately that region needs more coverage. It's, as you say, it's kind of key to the vitality of the city and all the things that he's trying to do as mayor. So it can be, I guess, a double-edged sword for local official like yourself or elected officials. Of course, you have, the dual hats of having been an elected official as well. And you've probably felt a little of those arrows from the press at times, but it hasn't steered you away from the idea of wanting to see more of it.
That's right. I think Jack Spillane might have dinged me once or twice too, but
there you go.
Yeah, I mean, our family for 17 years has spent summers, a few weeks at least each summer down on the South Coast in the New Bedford area. And, I've watched the New Bedford Light in particular grow and scale. And I sat with not only John Mitchell, but some of the other original founders of the New Bedford Light to learn how they did it, why, what they initially focused on, learn what they thought they did well, what they didn't do well. And, we incorporated a lot of that into our thinking and kind of rollout and areas of focus that Dave's going to lead the team on. So you're absolutely right. The idea is when people are informed about a whole range of issues that are important, to a community, it's a better, healthier community. And I think that was what Mayor Mitchell's point was in advocating for it. And he'd be the first to tell you that, there are probably times he's not full agreement with, maybe the perspective that Jack Spillane or another reporter may have in an angle that they're covering. But the fact that they're out there trying to get the story out, talking to both sides is really, really, really important. Whether you're a mayor, whether you're a business leader, an institutional leader, somebody in the arts and cultural community, educational community, that storytelling and good quality journalism is really important. So that's what we're trying to do. And I hope there's days that we say, hey, they didn't get it right from a chamber point of view, and we can grouse and complain about it. But at least the information's out there, and I'm confident with good editors and good journalists, they'll get it right, more times than not, in telling both sides of the story. And we need that here. As I mentioned, we don't have the volume or numbers of news organizations maybe that other communities have. And if we can get additional journalists and reporters out there, it's good for our community and Central Mass.
Tim Murray, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It was great to learn about the Worcester Guardian, and we'll look forward to seeing its launch.
Thanks, Michael.
And thank you all for listening to another episode of the podcast from CommonWealth Magazine. I'm Michael Jonas. We will see you next week.